in my view, the opportunity to take some more insurance in terms of a higher rate is really past now, because we're going to go into the period now where inflation will clearly be falling, but more importantly, the economy will be continuing to weaken. So the case to raise rates in an environment like that will be pretty thin. So I think now it's really a matter of at what point will they be starting to cut rates, and I think that's some way off. But certainly the case for raising rates now is going to become progressively weaker.
On the back of today's weak household spending data from the ABS, could that date of rate cutting be even sooner than analysts had expected up until this point?
Well, I think the issue there is that the inflation is going to remain sticky. So we think it'll be down to around 3.9% by the end of the year. But that's still a long way away from where they should be targeting, which is 2.5%, the middle of the band. I would think that by August next year, the inflation rate will be down to around 3.4%, which is getting close to the band. And I think that'll open up the prospects for rate cuts, but not before, because inflation will still be too high.
We'll get a proper look at the nation's accounts on Wednesday. Do you think they could be weaker than expected given recent economic data?
Well, we've got growth of 0.4%, including the most important part of the accounts is the household sector. We've got that growing at 0 in the June quarter. That's down from 0.2 in the March quarter and 0.3 in the December quarter. So you think in terms of household spending running around trend of around 2.5 or so. So you're going to have 3 quarters in a row where the households have just been under so much pressure, cost of living, rising interest rates and increasing tax take. So yes, look, it's possible that the number could be even worse than that in terms of household spending. And we did see some indication today on weaker profits than expected and a bigger downturn in inventories that were expected. So it's possible that number might be negative on Wednesday, but I suspect we'll find a way that it won't be negative, but it'll still be very weak.
Will Australia sidestep a recession?
Look, I think it will. I think it'll, in terms of the technical definition of a recession, two consecutive negative quarters, I think it will sidestep recession. But how people feel will be recessionary, because we're talking about the economy growing by, this year, we're expecting growth of 1%, and the population growth will be 1.8%. So in a per capita sense, it's a recession. And next year we're looking at growth of 1.4%, population growth of 1.6%. So another year of a per capita recession. So in terms of per capita terms, yes, I think the economy will register a recession. In terms of the technical term, 2 negative quarters, probably not.
Is the migration rate going to contribute to an increase in the jobless rate? How high do you believe it will go?
We've got it up at 4.5% by the middle of next year. So slowly rising in the second half of this year, but starting to gather momentum next year as the economy continues to weaken. 4.5% doesn't seem that high relative to previous cycles, but it'll still be a 1% increase in the unemployment rate, partly due to fast immigration. And I think that's enough for the Reserve Bank to go, well, inflation's on the way down, the economy's weak. We expect that for the year to the June quarter next year, the economy will grow by 0.8%. So these numbers are really indicating that there will be a point where they believe that they can start providing some relief. But I think the inflation story will be the dominant one for the next 12 months.
A survey out today has revealed that nearly a quarter of all New South Wales businesses plan to cut staff in the next 3 months. You say the jobless rate will reach 4.5% around the middle of next year.
Yeah.
Do you think the RBA could have overhyped?
Well, if you look at global rates, the US is between 5.25 and 5.5, and the market is still hanging on to the possibility of another hike in November. We're sitting at 4.1. Australia traditionally never has lower rates than the US. Now, where the adjustment is happening, of course, is through the currency. So the risk is if the currency adjustment becomes a lot greater, then that's when you may start to see some inflation concerns. So that's why I think the Reserve Bank will have to maintain some pretty tough rhetoric. So I think that they'll continue to look at the possibility of raising rates or going on hold, nothing else, for the next couple of months, and also talk about the possibility of having to raise rates, but I don't think they'll actually get around to doing that. The other big factor is that with the movement from fixed rate to floating rate, so people moving off 2% to 6%, that means that even when the RBA stops, average mortgage rates will continue to rise as more of these people go on to higher rates. And it could mean up to between 0.75% and 1% increase in average mortgage rates between now and the middle of next year. So given that situation, the top rate of 4.1 is sort of understating how far mortgage rates are going to be moving in this very unusual cycle.
Phil Lowe will finish his term helming the RBA in the middle of this month. He was governor at the most volatile of times. How do you rate his performance?
Oh, look, I've always said that he's the best economist I've seen in the public sector in my time. Whenever I read his speeches, I learn something. I think he had an incredibly difficult challenge, and the policy instruments that he used during COVID at the time were considered to be necessary and did play a role. Of course, the major reason why the economy avoided a recession during that period was government spending, the big fiscal stimulus. So I think that if you look at how he communicated the state of the economy to the people, I think he did a great job. I think he just had a very, very difficult time near the end when he adopted a policy called yield curve control that other central banks did not adopt. In my opinion, it was a better policy than quantitative easing, because in quantitative easing, the Reserve Bank just bloated its balance sheet. Now, RBA eventually used that, but in the early stages, they used yield curve control rather than quantitative easing, as with all other central banks, which has meant that in terms of a bloated balance sheet, the Reserve Bank is doing better than it would have done if it had followed everyone else. And it was that yield curve control that did that. But in order to do yield curve control, he had to say, I'm buying 3-year bonds at the cash rate. In other words, I'm not going to be raising rates until 2024. And of course, he didn't interpret that as a promise, but the media, of course, did. And that was the big issue that brought him undone.
The incoming Governor, Michelle Bullock, spoke last week about the possible impacts of climate change on monetary policy. What will be the other big challenges during her term?
Look, obviously that will be one of them. I think the biggest challenge she has is the structure of the new board. So if we look at the new board, it's 9 members, which we had in the past of the Monetary Policy Board, but as recommended by the review, there'll be 7 outsiders, all of whom are appointed for their monetary policy expertise, and only 2 people representing the Reserve Bank, and of course they're the 2 that have the responsibility to achieve the inflation target. This is very different to boards that we have in other countries. So in the case of the UK, they have 5 insiders and 4 outsiders. In the US, it's 7 insiders and 5 outsiders. In Canada, it's 5 insiders, 1 outsider. New Zealand, 4-3. So she's going to have an extraordinary challenge in bringing around the 7 other members of the board who all will see themselves as monetary policy experts. That will be a big challenge. And remember, she has to do a press conference at the end of each meeting, and the vote will be announced. So let's say the vote's 6-3. So the first question that the media will be asking Michelle will be, were you one of the 6 or one of the 3? It's going to be a really tough challenge. I think she's up to the challenge, but we're not making it easy for her.
Bill Evans, great to speak to you.
Thank you.